The panelists from both.
Cool, perfect.
Fantastic. I'll repeat myself then since we'll go to the beginning. So I'm here with a distinguished group of panelists who are online, some of whom are also in the room with us. They're from both the humanitarian and development sectors, and they're here today to talk about their efforts to strengthen cooperation in the area of social protection, including the provision of cash and voucher assistance in Palestine. Palestine, of course, is a longstanding humanitarian context. We're all acutely aware of that today. There are a large number of international agencies and organizations that are present and have been present on the ground for decades now. But it's also a context in which there has been a longstanding state-building effort and attempts to empower national authorities to ensure the welfare of citizens. So today, we want to look at how both the national and the non-state actors are now working together to try to build a more coherent and comprehensive social protection system for Palestinians. My name is James Kanaj, and I work for the International Labor Organization, or the ILO. The ILO is known for efforts primarily to protect workers against a variety of what we call life cycle risks. These are things like unemployment, workplace accidents, disability, et cetera, that are defined in our body of international labor standards. But in addition to these protections for workers, the ILO has also been supporting the Palestinian Authority, as we do elsewhere, to establish a national social protection floor for all citizens against these same risks, using things like cash transfers and social services. And this has led the ILO to take on a bit of an unusual, although not entirely unintuitive role as part of the humanitarian development nexus discussions in Palestine. And so to get us more into the details, I'd like to hand it over first to Karis Reed, who is the Social Protection Officer at the ILO's Jerusalem office, for a brief presentation on the latest developments, including those that have transpired after October of last year, which will then be followed by a round of questions from me to our panelists, both in the room and online, before we turn it over to a Q&A segment with audience members in the room and online as well. So Karis, if you're with us, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Yeah,
I see you there. Yeah, please.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. So I will just give a brief presentation to give an overview of our work so far in Palestine over the last few years. A lot of this has been funded by an EU project, which is led by the ILO together with UNICEF and Oxfam. But it's important to mention that there's been a huge range of partners that have been essential to some of our successes, including many of those that are on the panel today. So the context in Palestine, it's been a fragile context historically, with an extremely protracted crisis, occupation for almost 60 years now, and chronic financial crises in the last 5 years or more. So this includes of the Palestinian Authority, but also some of the other actors that are involved in delivering services here. This fragility has been exacerbated since the 7th of October and the outbreak of war. So it's an extreme humanitarian emergency in Gaza, as I'm sure you're all aware, with almost the entire population displaced. And the situation is deteriorating in the West Bank as well. So historically, there's been really one main government social protection program. This was poverty targeted with quite irregular payments, and there's very limited social insurance, only for a few public sector workers. Now, in 2024, the Palestinian Authority are moving towards individual rights-based allowances, starting in the West Bank and to be rolled out in Gaza later on. In terms of the humanitarian side, there have been long-standing humanitarian safety net programs with budgets and coverage comparable or higher than government programs. So this includes those from UNRWA and WFP. And these have maybe shifted a bit since the start of the war, but we expect that they will re-emerge in some form later on again as well, and they continue in the West Bank. And there's also a range of humanitarian cash actors delivering MPCA or CVA in Gaza and in the West Bank. And this has rapidly increased in scale since the start of the war, although still, I think, not high enough to meet the huge scale of needs in Gaza. So in this context, what was the problem, or why was there a need for coordination? So ultimately, there are extremely limited resources and high, now hugely increasing needs. There's a complex mix of duty bearers or power holders and also cash implementers, all with varied levels of funding, also different funding constraints and different mandates. And historically, the cash programming has not been jointly planned, aside from some small elements of bilateral coordination between different actors. So the cash and the social protection sector needs to become more coherent, primarily in order to provide more regular, transparent, and accountable support for vulnerable Palestinians. So historically, beneficiaries might receive different amounts of transfers from different actors at different times without understanding why and where the next transfer might come from. There's also a need to become more coherent in order to most efficiently and effectively use the limited resources we have available. We felt previously that there was high potential for this, given that a lot of the programs actually target similar groups of vulnerable Palestinians and have similar objectives. And finally, there is a need to align programming in regular times here in Palestine, not just in acute shocks. This is because of the protracted nature of the crisis. So some of the originally humanitarian programs have become structural, forming regular safety nets, not just in shocks. So to address this need, we set up the Social Protection Cash and Voucher Assistance Thematic Working Group in 2022. This is co-chaired by the Ministry of Social Development on one side and OCHA on the other side. So it sits between the Development Partners Structure, which is the Social Protection Sector Working Group, and the ICCG and the Cash Working Group structure, which are kind of exclusively humanitarian in Palestine. And it allows for a neutral forum for these actors to engage together. And we included representatives from all different groups and constituencies in Palestine. So the objective of the thematic working group is to find operational synergies and to develop programmatic coherence towards a harmonized approach in implementing both short-term and also long-term cash transfers. In 2023, at the start of 2023, we had workshops to discuss how can the thematic working group best work together? How can we be most successful? And we agreed to move forward at the leadership macro and micro levels. So this is just a photo from one of those workshops. The macro level, this means creating a shared knowledge base. So things like terminology mapping or other mappings and analysis, and also having quarterly meetings with the whole of the thematic working group membership, where there would be a space for humanitarians and the ministry to share updates with each other and discuss different topics. And then at the micro level, we set up work streams that would undertake prototyping. So basically this means trying out practical elements of coordination rather than getting stuck in these kind of high-level discussions around occupation or red lines of different actors, but actually just going together and trying out something. So just for example, if we might try that one NGO in Gaza wants to share only 5 households into the ministry social registry. How can they go about that? So we try it for 1 month, we see what happens, we learn what worked and what didn't, and then we come back together and we try it again. And maybe next time we do it with 2 NGOs or we do it with 10 households. And whilst there are huge kind of data sharing constraints at the macro level, at the micro level, we can try it out and try to learn actually what works and what doesn't. So we had various work streams in 2023. Originally, we started with 4, and then we later adapted and refined this into 3 work streams. So the first one on routine social protection. This is social protection in normal times. So these long-term safety nets that I was mentioning. Secondly, there was a work stream on immediate shock responsive social protection. So say after an acute shock in the first 6 months. And then finally, there was a work stream on referrals. So how humanitarian actors could refer into the ministry's case management system. And just to focus a bit on work stream 1, which was on routine social protection. So the idea initially was to create a unified triple strand safety net between the ministry's program and WFP and UNRWA's cash or voucher programs. This came as a key recommendation from multiple different studies in the sector. So the intention was to create one unified program that then other actors could interact against. So MPCA actors could then decide how to align or complement or overlap with this program as one cohesive element. And we set up a much smaller group to focus on this. So only 5 actors, the 3 main safety nets, 2 humanitarian actors, and then also 2 facilitators. And just before the war, we had been discussing what does this alignment really mean? So if we imagine a case in the future where the Ministry of Social Development, their social registry, covers all possible Palestinians in need of income support, then this would include the WFP, UNRWA, and ministry current caseloads. So as a minimum, we needed a way to cross-check the data between different beneficiaries. And as an ideal, we would like to move towards some kind of cohesive design or cohesive allocation of resources. This work has actually continued focusing on the data sharing and partly on the design since October as well. And in 2024, we have reformulated our approach to the thematic working group based on the new context. So this is a rough diagram, but just to share with you our thinking. At the macro level, the membership will be widened to include more humanitarian cash actors, also local NGOs and other government ministries that have been involved in cash response since October. The purpose of this forum is to build on the dialogue and relationships that we had already worked on and build consensus between a wider group of actors towards the work that's going on. And then at the micro level, we merged the 3 work streams that we had in 2023 into one spearhead group. This is a place for the decision makers on a kind of need to be there basis for actual key implementers who can then take practical actions towards coordination, the same as what the work streams had been. And the focus areas for this group will be priorities identified by the thematic working group. So at the moment, we're looking at this triple strand alignment again, 3SSN data sharing and alignment. And then secondly, expansion of the ministry social registry and coordination with the cash working group on lists of beneficiaries, particularly in Gaza. But these might change as we go forward. And then finally, there will be some side projects or initiatives. This is individual pieces of research that fall under the oversight of the thematic working group, but don't require active coordination day to day. And the final information on the thematic working group is that we've carried out various pieces of analysis. So we conducted a programs mapping of all the different social protection, cash and voucher assistance programs in Palestine, and then created a dashboard or a monitor for this. This has not yet been updated since October, and the situation has changed dramatically. We also conducted a synthesis report, which synthesized the recommendations and findings from all of the recent research in the sector from all partners. And this created some kind of mandate for the thematic working group to then go ahead and focus on these areas driven by the members themselves and their own research. We've conducted individual kind of topical pieces of analysis. So one was on transfer value determination mechanisms and alignment. There's another one ongoing on payment modalities. And finally, there's also ongoing an options analysis on options for alignment at the program design level, but also at the operational or program administrative level. This analysis started before October, but is now continuing and being discussed in the thematic working group. So just to share a few key learnings with you. Number one is that the dialogue and relationship building are critical. So we did create these new forums for coordination, but in reality, the real shift or the real reason for success has been working together jointly on defining the problem, creating a joint vision, and then actually testing things together practically. Secondly, the broad-based membership of the thematic working group has solidified the nexus agenda or as an idea into the sectoral agenda and discussions. So just as an example, the thematic working group and the need for interaction with national social protection systems was included in the flash appeal for the first time this year. And finally, the third lesson is around shifting to adaptive management. So the fact that it's possible to try out practical elements of coordination rather than getting trapped in these kind of high-level political discussions or otherwise producing analysis unilaterally and then expecting others to take this up. We had a few small wins to date, and I think this first one is probably the most important or interesting, is that dialogue has allowed actors to continue this coordination even since October and the outbreak of war, even with the humanitarian emergency that's ongoing. All sides, all actors have still been interested to continue in the coordination. And actually, we've seen some pieces of work, for example, some of the work on data sharing and sharing of lists pick up pace since October because of the need. Secondly, we found that creating safe spaces has allowed actors to discuss their red lines more openly. And then finally, the co-chairing of the thematic working group has allowed actors from across the spectrum to present in forums where they would not have traditionally been present. So humanitarian actors in development-only forums or the ministry in humanitarian-only forums. So the final thing to say is practically, what would this mean for you if you wanted to implement it elsewhere? Firstly, it's super complicated in Palestine. The politics, the budgets, different mandates, different interests. This means that we found technical and strategic work need to move forward in parallel. So these strategic level discussions are important to move forward the agenda, but in reality, there might be practical technical things you can start now, even while the strategic discussions continue, and maybe they take a longer time. As I mentioned already, we have found we need to expand the membership of the thematic working group even further as the forum for dialogue, but then at the same time to create a much smaller group of key implementers on a need-to-be-there basis for the practical work to actually move forward. We found over the last couple of years that we need to actually work with the larger actors or programs first, and then try to bring in the others later on. This is because some of these large programs have much higher budgets and maybe more power, and if they make the change, then it would have a much bigger impact than some of the small elements. It has to be a two-way effort between humanitarians and national authorities together. Something like coming together on an equal footing or coming together without the previous biases and understanding that both sides have red lines for different reasons, and then being able to discuss those red lines openly and understand each other, I guess, as individuals and then as organizations. And finally, the need to keep changing and adapting as you go forward, which we've been doing even since October. So that was a brief overview, and handing back to James, I think. Thanks.
Aris, thank you. Thank you for that. Very informative. And very clearly, there's lots of structures and processes that have been put in place in Palestine to help bring about some of the progress that's been achieved. I can only imagine that a lot of this is underpinned by a lot of relationship building and interpersonal relationship building, and then by extension, perhaps institutional relationship building and cultivation of trust. And so congratulations to you and all of the agencies that are involved in this effort. I'd like to then begin sort of the panel discussion segment of our event by introducing our first panelist, Mr. Luca Sangali. He is the National Cash Working Group Coordinator in Palestine, deployed by CashCap. Luca, we've just heard a lot about the different structures and processes involved, including this thematic working group. And I guess my sort of frank question to you is, what exactly were some of the problems that this thematic working group was designed to address? And has it been successful in bringing about those desired changes? And then what impact do you think these types of changes have on a beneficiary from their perspective? What sort of improvements can it bring to them? Please.
Thanks a lot, James, for the introduction and Karis for the presentation. Just maybe before starting, just want to note, building on what Karis said, this is a very long-term process and it's quite complicated. So it might be a bit early for a comprehensive look back, but still, there are some initial thoughts, that can be shared. And the reason why this is very long are multiple. One is that we're really talking about a lot of different systems that were not built to talk together, and now we're making them, trying to talk together and engage. Then the PA fiscal crisis, the issues on the social protection side that translate into staffing capacities at authorities level is also an issue. The fact that the ongoing social protection system in Palestine is in reality under a reform since at least late 2021. So we are actually trying to align with something that is transforming, is mutating in itself. And then last but not least, of course, the current situation and the crisis unfolding since late October. But then trying to basically answer your question, I think there were three main challenges that we can identify. One was the lack of communication. Again, that's something Karis touched upon. Before the establishment of this group, there were only very few solid examples of bilateral communications, most notably WFP and UNRWA. Maybe my colleagues will definitely expand on those. And then there was sporadic ad hoc contacts from international NGOs and specifically from cash actors. To give you a personal example, maybe Manal remembers this meeting. I've been in the position since early 2020, and I have engaged a lot with MOSD that year. Then in 2021, for different reasons, we had no contacts. And then we had a meeting at end of November 2021, and it felt like two completely different worlds. We were just not understanding each other, speaking different languages, having different understanding of basic concepts. It was a very long, very heated meeting, if you remember, Manal, and it was just impossible to talk. And I think the thematic working group has managed to address this work. Now there is an ongoing multi-layer communication with different scopes, different objectives, and that's ongoing at different levels and with different people. A second problem this group tried to address, and we are still at the beginning of that, is fragmentation. Somebody said in a meeting a few weeks ago that if you go to a household in Gaza, maybe not now, but before the crisis, if you go to a household in Gaza and try to understand what they get, from whom, how much, how frequently, based on which targeting criteria, you will just get lost. There are so many different aids coming in, everybody doing a piece, very uncoordinated, household receiving a lot of different type of assistances for different type of objectives. It's a very fragmented type of structure. And while the thematic working group has not solved the problem in total, I think what did good is that we identified what the structure should be and what the vision should be. And that's exactly the triple strand social safety net system that Karis explained, with the three main social assistance programs, so MOSD, WFP, and UNRWA, and then humanitarian agencies coordinating into that and stepping up and down depending on the severity of each crisis. And then finally, interoperability, which is part of the previous program. There were some big steps done on this. Again, most recently, the UNRWA MOSD MOU, which I think Sasha will talk more about, but also the access of humanitarian agencies to the National Social Registry, which was boosted, by the crisis. It often happens, when a crisis happens, we need to get things done. So it's not time to talk anymore, it's time to act. So we just do it, and then think about it. On your second question, how does my impact, on the experience of the beneficiaries in the future? I think two main points. One is clarity on social assistance and entitlements, and importantly, also predictability of assistance. So knowing what you're going to get next month. And then expanded coverage. This is a work also about the duplication and more effective targeting. So we hope, this will help more efficiently and effectively everyone. So just to conclude, I think the technical working groups start yielding some positive results. But the focus and the active commitment needs to remain very high from all parties involved, especially in this new reality that we are all living in Palestine. Back to you.
Thanks, Luca. It sounds like some of these, what seem perhaps from the outside as a lot of bureaucratic processes, it sounds like it has led to sort of a coalescence around a shared vision among many of the actors in Palestine, and that stands to translate into a simplification of the beneficiary experience as they navigate what will be or what is the Social Protection Administration. I'd like to hand it over to our next panelist who is joining us online. Ms. Manal Abu Ramadan. She is the Director General of Planning and Aid Management at the Ministry of Social Development. Hi, Manal, thanks for joining us. From the Palestinian Authority's perspective, what are some of the recent developments in Palestine that have enabled you to work more closely together with humanitarian organizations in a way that wasn't possible before? And what else do you think is needed to push that cooperation a bit even further? I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for the comprehensive overview from Karis and Luca. As the Palestinian Ministry of Social Development holds a leadership position in the social protection sector through policymaking, oversight, and service provisions for vulnerable community, given the series of and aggressions from the Israeli occupation, our fiscal crisis, and rising the needs of the people, collaborative response and relief efforts are crucial. And our approach is to establish a national system for social protection and integrated programs addressing both immediate and long-term needs holistically. By coordinating initiatives and pooling resources, the ministry, humanitarian assistance providers, and development organizations can ensure complementary programs that avoid duplication and maximize collective impact on vulnerable groups. This was reflected through establishing the Social Protection Cash and Voucher Thematic Working Group and the related working streams that mentioned there earlier by Karis. All these works enable the ministry to routinely engage in policy dialogues and strategic discussions on priorities, resources allocation, and joint undertakings between government and non-government stakeholders. These consultations and collaborative projects help align efforts to guarantee a coherent response matching community needs. We see our fruitful work in the ongoing war in Gaza and West Bank. To further strengthen cooperation between the Palestinian government and humanitarian organization, we think that we should work to continue our efforts to enhance the communication and information sharing through using the Palestinian National Social Registry and establish a clear channels for sharing information in a structured manner, formally through the MOUs that we are now working on with the UNRWA and other actors, which will, this coordination will support evidence-based decision-making process. We also think that investing in the ongoing training and skills and development for relevant government officials and humanitarian workers would enable more efficient and synchronized interventions while also fostering a collaborative work culture. We need to strengthen the fundraising of efforts domestically and internationally to generate adequate funding for joint programs and initiatives. We think also that the institutional integration, we could work more on pursuing a more coordinated institutional framework to streamline processes, reduce duplication of services, and improve efficiency of delivery to vulnerable population. Finally, I want to say that long-term planning, especially for the situation we are facing in Gaza, and we should think more about the day after and how to enhance this side. The most important thing is to create a comprehensive long-term strategy plans addressing root causes of vulnerable through sustainable development initiatives, and identifying projects that build resilience, promote inclusion, and reduce poverty in the long run, which could optimize cooperation between government and other partners. And I think we could do these things through our current work through the thematic working group. Thank you. Over.
Thank you. Thank you, Manal. it sounds like from you, sort of the message I'm getting is that it's important that we continue to look towards the future, even despite the very acute crises that we have going on today, and that having that longer time horizon as well as dialogue, and it sounds like there needs to even be more dialogue to strengthen the relationships and strengthen the cooperation and joint planning, is what has what's enabled you to get the progress that you have so far, and what is probably most promising for additional progress later on. So thank you for your intervention. Our next panelist is on the other side of me, so I think I can do this. Does it stretch? All right. So this question is going to Mr. Sasha Grauman, who's Deputy Director of Relief and Social Services at UNRWA. Sasha, what have been, in your estimation, the particular barriers to nexus alignment in Palestine? And I mean this compared to other countries in the region where UNRWA works. And what sort of things are being done at UNRWA to overcome them?
Thanks, James. And first, let me start by saying that for UNRWA has very much benefited from the work of the Social Protection Working Group in reforming our own assistance program. So that has been very helpful in coordinating for us with other agencies. With regard to your specific question, I think from an UNRWA perspective, there are two types of barriers that we are facing. Those that are related to the particular situation in Palestine, and then those that are related to our mandate. And with regard to the situation in Palestine, and as you wanted that to be compared to other countries where UNRWA operates, which is Syria, Lebanon, and Jordan, obviously in Palestine, the political and security instability by the ongoing Israeli-Palestinian conflict has greatly impacted the humanitarian development and work to a much greater extent than in the other countries in which we operate. Secondly, that situation then also includes access and movement restrictions that are imposed by the Israeli authorities and that hinder the implementation of development projects and the distribution of humanitarian aid. Thirdly, in particular to the Palestine situation, the fact that we have a very fragmented authority and governance issues between Gaza and the West Bank, with the geographical and political divisions that complicate creating a cohesive policies. And then we have the economic dependence and restrictions. So the Palestinian economy is heavily dependent on external aid and has very limited control over its own natural resources. There are restrictions on exports and imports that complicate development efforts, and that creates a whole set of other barriers to implementing the nexus. And then we see that the international aid dynamics and aid in the Palestinian context, and specifically for UNRWA in particular, is highly politicized. And that leads to significant fluctuations in aid, and which then impacts the possibilities for doing long-term development efforts and provide services. And lastly, and more specifically to the UNRWA context, Palestinian refugees enjoy different levels and statuses and rights in their host countries, which can reach from full citizenship in some places to severe restrictions on their possibility to take out employment. And that then creates constraints for implementing the nexus and empowering the Palestinian refugees as far as UNRWA is concerned. Now, and then there are, secondly, a whole host of unique barriers that are related to the UNRWA mandate. And as you probably know, UNRWA's mandate is to support those who lost their home and means of livelihood as a result of the 1948 conflict. And consequently, UNRWA is primarily a humanitarian agency, but nevertheless, it does provide development interventions, future programs on health and education, services on microfinance, for instance. So both of the humanitarian and the development aspect are in the work that we do. And in the relief context in particular, we integrate these functions into, let's say, a nascent social protection framework that has both a more humanitarian component of emergency relief and a more long-term development component of a social safety net program, which is then complemented by prioritizing the most vulnerable in other services that UNRWA provides, like TIVIT, like hospitalization assistance, like shelter rehabilitation, so that we try to form a holistic social protection package for the most vulnerable Palestinian refugees. And that, in some sense, integrates UNRWA's humanitarian aid and development assistance in building the capabilities and conditions for longer-term stability. However, pursuing the nexus in the UNRWA context is limited by the fact that UNRWA, compared to UNHCR, for instance, does not engage in providing durable solutions, which in itself is a highly political aspect of the UNRWA mandate, and particularly driven by the desire to uphold the right to return of the Palestinian refugees. And instead, the resolution of the status of Palestinian refugees is largely seen as related to the broader political solution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And that leaves the Palestinian refugees in a very particular and challenging position. And that limits, then, of course, our possibility and creates barriers to implement the nexus on our side, because we are dependent on a political solution being reached. And another aspect to that is the fact that UNRWA in itself is a service provider. So the health and education services are being provided by UNRWA, and it is not in the mandate of the agency to, as other development agencies would do, to hand this over and to build the capacity of host governments to provide those services to Palestinian refugees. Now, if it comes to the question what we are doing about it, partly addressing these barriers is through coordination with other UN agencies, and that's what we are doing in the Social Protection Working Group. And it's particularly important in the Palestine situation, where the refugees present a large share of the population, much larger than in the other regions and in the other countries in which we operate. Now, the problem that we are facing is that the resource constraints and the program design issues have led to situations that, to some extent, make our own social safety net program inefficient in providing the social protection that Palestinian refugees need. And these things are related to using PMTF targeting in context where they are largely inappropriate because of the widespread poverty, or fixed budget ceiling. The attempt that UNRWA has made initially to reach greater coverage by providing transfer values which are largely inappropriate to actually make a difference in alleviating poverty. And then in some fields, and that includes the context in Palestine, the overlap between our own proxy means tested system and those of host countries. And we have been addressing these issues through a number of reform processes, reform tracks that we have been going through, including in the Palestine context and in coordination with the Social Protection Working Group. And that firstly includes that we are moving away from a PMT formula for targeting towards more categorical targeting, particularly in these contexts where poverty is very high. That concerns the situation in Gaza and Syria and in Lebanon, whereas in other places we try to more strongly align with the host government which is, as far as our program in the West Bank is concerned, and it's part of the discussion that we're having in the social protection working group. The other thing that we are doing is to better align these two parts of our relief program, the humanitarian emergency relief and the more long-term social safety net program. And then to better align the cash transfer levels with actual household needs by partly reducing the coverage and focusing on the most vulnerable. And lastly, what we have been working on, which is also quite important in the UNRWA context, is to increase the accountability and strengthen the administration of the UNRWA relief program and the cash and food assistance.
Great. Thank you, Sasha. Interesting perspective, and it sounds like, in particular, for UNRWA, the opportunity to be part of a sort of consortium of humanitarian and development actors has enabled you to maybe find some additional complements to your very specific mandate and provide some alternative support to Palestine refugees that you serve typically. So the next panelist is joining us online, Mr. Salah Laham, who is the National Social Protection Vulnerability Assessment and Resilience Lead for the WFP in Palestine. Hi, Salah. My question to you is, of course, as one of the three strands of this triple strand social safety net in Palestine that we heard about earlier, where can you tell us that WFP is today in efforts to align its activities with those of the other two strands? And what are some of the sort of easy wins that you say that you could say are already within your reach versus some of the more challenging objectives that you may hope to achieve later on? Please, I give the floor to you. You might be on mute, Salah. At least in the room, we can't hear you. I don't know, Karis, are you able to hear Salah online?
No, we cannot hear him.
Ah. And not only is the audio gone, but I think maybe you're frozen also now, Salah. Let us move.
Did you hear me now?
Yeah, now we can hear you. Perfect. All right, please.
Okay. Thank you. Because I want to ask my IT colleague if there's an issue with the... So, good morning, and thanks, James, for the introduction, and Karis for the presentation, and to give me the chance to talk about social protection Palestine. Regarding, just one thing I want to say before answering the question and give you a brief about what we are doing. I think the Nexus project give a chance to us as WFP, UNRWA, and MSD to have like ongoing systematic discussion. Let's put it like this, in one room, which is, it is a plus, compared to the past, So, as you know, WFP, UNRWA, and MSD, they are, the main player in terms of providing social assistance to the Palestinian people, both in Gaza and West Bank. Even, pre-crisis, what I mean, pre-7th of October, that's around 80% in Gaza, they already received like assistance from these three organizations. What I mean, of course, that's based on our mandate. We provide for refugees, while UNRWA, they provide for non-refugees, and MSD, they provide for both, I think, cash assistance. WFP as one of the vital strands of this three social safety net in Palestine. It tried to do like alignment, its effort with other two strands, the Ministry of Social Development and UNRWA, to ensure comprehensive coverage and efficient resource utilization, as I mentioned. And I think the Nexus project gave the platform to talk about these 2 points. Collaboration closely with MSD, where WFP is targeting the most vulnerable population across Palestine. Now, we are already providing assistance 1.1 million people in Gaza, for example, because Gaza it is 2.2 million. We divide more or less jointly with UNRWA. Alongside the 1.1 million refugees supported by UNRWA to ensure that the whole population of Gaza has access to some basic food commodity. This has been even more important since the NCTB has ceased to be able to provide assistance to the people during the crisis. So this is, very critical, especially now in Gaza. WFP was working closely with MSD and UNRWA even before the onset of the current crisis. The current efforts built on that. Prior to the crisis, WFP was working provided by the MSD to provide cash top-up to a third of poorest national cash transfer beneficiary to complement the NCTB payment given the low transfer value and to enable greater dietary diversity for the poorest. WFP continues such cash top-up in close coordination with the MSD in the West Bank. In very simple word, that we already provide like a top-up, complement MSD cash transfer program. And of course, we also coordinate with UNRWA to avoid duplication and to target non-refugees population. Within the honest of the current crisis in Gaza and with the market not functioning well, WFP has switched to in-kind assistance to bring more essential commodity in the enable food availability in the market. WFP in November last year, we already stopped our cash or voucher program in Gaza due to that the market is not working well and we need to increase the availability of the food inside Gaza. But we continue in West Bank providing CBT voucher. WFP is providing ready-to-eat food parcel, hot meals, wheat flour, and specialized nutrition products to address malnutrition and actively working to rehabilitate collapsed food system because the food system already damaged in Gaza. For this reason, we continue providing food, hot meals, and nutritious food. Also, we are working now to prepare like a food system study to identify the bottleneck, the barrier, and the potential solution. We have been supporting bakers also to restart across Gaza working, providing wheat flour and fuel jointly with UNRWA and reaching 1.1 million with subsidized bread, including recently helping bakers to reopen Gaza City and North Gaza, just in the past 2 weeks, with people now getting fresh bread for the first time in the months. Now, regarding cash, for example, WFP focused on ensuring the market start to operate before and gradually switch to cash. Given the current shortage in the market that are driving high inflation and challenging liquidity situation. For example, there's only one ATM working in Rafah now at the present, and people are being charged to use it. WFP is monitoring market functionality and has set a series of criteria or triggers to enable a full shift to cash. There are a number of requirements, including market starting to function with reduced inflation, improved banking and cash liquidity, access and addressing current protection risk, community feedback on their preference, reliable access to data connectivity, and power. Given the vast needs, WFP is partnering with the UNRWA to deduplicate beneficiary list. We are working now with UNRWA, allowing each one on its mandate scope while seeking to ensure the population 2.2 million people in Gaza have access to basic needs. Additionally, WFP collaborates with UNRWA on various ad hoc projects, providing food voucher to refugees, all the while maintaining full coordination with UNRWA. WRB is committed to strengthen the national system by offering technical support. I think Manal, she mentioned about the importance of training and capacity. We believe that we need to have continue supporting the national system, continue providing technical support. Building on the existing cooperation, this includes assistance for targeting, consideration, registration, monitoring and evaluation, and use of geographical information system to map areas of vulnerability and provide assistance. Through this collaboration, WRB aimed to enhance the efficiency and effectiveness of social protection program. WRB signed memorandum of understanding with Ministry of Social Development to focus on this area and to strengthen the monitoring system, registration, and GIS system. While there are some easy wins currently in terms of streamlined cooperation among the three organizations to meet immediate humanitarian needs, moving forward and building on its humanitarian development mandate, WRB stressed more ambitious objective to support social protection efforts. A key goal is the establishment of a unified national social registry under the Ministry of Social Development leadership. Such registry would serve as a comprehensive database of beneficiaries and their specific needs, facilitating more targeted and efficient assistance. By striving toward this objective, WRB aims to build on current efforts to register people, not to create a parallel system, and to contribute to the establishment of a robust social protection system in Palestine that can effectively address the needs of the most vulnerable. Thank you. Over.
Thank you, Salah, for that very comprehensive overview of what WFP is doing currently. Clearly, there are lots of moving parts and lots of decisions to be taken by the different actors, including essential things like whether it's cash or in kind. And clearly, at the heart of the triple strand safety net, it seems that data and this social registry is really sort of the glue that is keeping it together. So thank you for those reflections. I'd like to pass it on now to our next panelist. I think we're going to have to slide the microphone down even further. Perhaps I ask the question and then we'll slide it. Or rather, even better idea. So our next panelist is Mrs. Claire Mariani. She's chief of the Humanitarian Cash Transfer Unit at UNICEF. Claire, I want to ask you, we've heard from some of the other participating agencies, but what has been UNICEF's experience in coordinating with the national social protection system in Palestine, and how has that compared to similar efforts done by UNICEF in other countries? And if you think there are some, tell us some of what you think are the promising factors for coordination in Palestine.
Thank you very much, James. So maybe let me start by saying that indeed, linking humanitarian cash assistance with social protection is really at the core of UNICEF mandate on social protection. And really, we are really building and leveraging on the fact that UNICEF is both a humanitarian and a development agencies, and really leveraging the fact that UNICEF is there before, during, and after the crisis. And I think for us, it's really something that is so critical to allow us to really contribute to the building of these linkages between our cash assistance in emergencies and our mandate of building also the capacity of government system to respond to emergencies, and also to continue whatever has been starting during an emergency. So I really wanted to flag this and really frame this, or share this, to frame better the work we have been doing specifically in Gaza since October 7. For us, what has been so critical in our current Gaza response is really leveraging the pre-crisis work that has been done with MOSD, and very much building on we had a cash program, a small-scale cash program that was already ongoing before October, and that was very much already using some of the list of the social registry. And once again, as it has been highlighted by many of the panelists, having that social registry available has really been a game changer. If I can compare with other responses that we have done, where not having a social registry has really delayed the response or has really limited our capacity to really build those linkages with the government system. So having already built that operational collaboration with MOSD with the social registry has really allowed UNICEF to very rapidly start a cash response few days after the events of October 7. And this has really been, as I said, a game changer and really allowed us to start that cash response. So as of today, UNICEF has been able to provide cash assistance to every fourth person in Gaza. So approximately a bit more than 500,000 people in Gaza have received a cash transfer from UNICEF, very much using an MPCA approach that was very rapidly completed or complemented by top-ups for nutrition for pregnant and lactated women, but also for children with disabilities. And this was done obviously using the PayPal payment mechanism, but also leveraging our data system that was receiving the list from the list of beneficiaries from the social registry. What we have done also, and that has really allowed us to, in a real-time manner, really adjust the design of our program and monitor the level of redemption of cash, was done through our rapid pro system, an SMS-based system that has allowed us to do more than 9,000 SMS-based survey to make sure that the cash recipients were able to redeem the cash and were able to access goods on the market. Because what we have been able to monitor and see is that despite the large supermarket being closed, the population was still being able to access goods and items through informal markets. And this has really reinforced us in our approach to really focus efforts on funding our cash assistance in Gaza up to now. So just now, a few considerations on coordination. So as I said, for us, the pre-existing work with MOSD has been so critical, and we have really used the past months to really strengthen and build even more our relationship with MOSD to provide the level of technical assistance to really go into a more longer-term approach with MOSD and make sure that all the humanitarian cash assistance that we were funding will also benefit to a longer-term objective. But we are also on the other side, or in addition, or in a more integrated manner, very much contributing to the effort that was led by the cash working group. And here we do have seen very critical successes that has really improved the quality of our cash response. First, I would like to really emphasize the work done around deduplication. And that process was really led by the cash working group, and that has been so critical to make sure that there was some understanding of who was paying whom in terms of use of list. I also want to flag the very good work around the transfer value alignment around the MPCA to make sure that there was some harmonization around the MEB across the different cash stakeholders. A lot of joint advocacy has also been done and has been really has really helped again the harmonization of the design of our program. We do see that the joint approach to work with PayPal, which was really the only and main financial service provider to address concerns around liquidity, around the high fees being charged by agents, has been super critical. And there was also some effort to do some joint presentation with donors, really trying to emphasize the role also of donors to create some incentive for humanitarian agencies to come together around coordination. A final reflection maybe on the challenges and how we should be looking forward and moving forward in terms of coordination. Obviously, as UNICEF, we would expect to see more agencies joining the level of coordination being done by the cash working group and also going into the thematic working group. It is so critical to have more stakeholders really being coordinated there around the operational coordination of the use of cash transfer. There is, especially moving forward, we do see a lot of opportunities and added value to really reinforce the way the deduplication is done. Deduplication is going to be so critical, especially for the day after, if we go at scale, even more on cash transfer, going into a more automated manner to do deduplication. And we have learning from other crises on how to do that at interagency level with the ministry will be something that will be so critical. So really looking forward, those operational coordination elements really will benefit from I'm guessing more resources also, because going into a more automated deduplication exercise does require resources, does require technical leadership. That maybe has not been at the level we would like to see it for such complex emergencies, and will be so critical moving forward. Thank you.
Happy to show my work was appreciated.
Yeah, thanks, Claire. It sounds like, again, the social registry, as you called it, a game changer, was one of these enabling factors that has allowed for some of the coordination efforts to really bear fruit, but that there remains still considerable work to be done on the basis of the work that I know that Luca and the Cash Working Group has done on harmonizing transfer values. So thank you for that. And then we go to our final panelist who's joining us online. I'm pleased to introduce Mr. Mu'min Badarna, who is the National Social Protection Coordinator at the ILO's office in Jerusalem. He's based in Ramallah. Mu'min, we talked, or at least I did a little bit in my introduction, about some of the international labor standards and how they define some of the sort of life cycle risks that can be categorically targeted. But they also lay out an important principle in the standards, which is this primary responsibility of the state in the provision of social protection. And of course, in Palestine, we talked already about the many and very large humanitarian actors that are responsible and have been for some time for providing social protection for refugees, but also other segments of the population. So in that context, how does the ILO see this primary responsibility of the state as social protection provider ultimately taking shape? Over to you.
Yeah, thank you, James, and thanks all for convening this session. I think it's a very important session, and I think as well this is a very important question and very relevant, especially during these times where the discussion about the role of the state, especially when you have limited ability of the national system, sometimes that role get lost in conversations. It is true, ILO standards and conventions explicitly mention the role of the state and the primary responsibility of the state to provide and establish social protection floors that are adapted to national circumstances. This is also deeply rooted in the ILO's work in Palestine, where we also acknowledge the reality there. And the reality is that we have large humanitarian programs and that have been operating for many years now, deep humanitarian needs as well, that are increasing day by day, both in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. All of that comes with the limited ability of the national authorities to cover the needs and finance the national social protection system due to several reasons, which have been previously mentioned by my colleagues, around the recurrent crises and the restrictions of the occupation and etc. However, with that being said, building the state is the long term. This is the long-term goal. And this is the goal that Palestinians have set for themselves and largely invested plenty of efforts in building this state. Same goes for donors and development actors who have been for years massively investing in the social protection system since the creation of the Palestinian Authority. The European Union, the World Bank, European member states as well have invested so much time, efforts, technical assistance, human resources, and funds to support the national social protection system in a way as well towards the implementation of that two-state solution. Now, regardless whether this two-state solution is near or not, the need to continue to strengthen the national system is vital. And we cannot, I think, reach a stage where we just abandon the national system and where we just abandon the whole progress that we have made in the years and the investment that we have as well put back in the years. That would constitute loss of progress, reform made, national reform made, expertise, and most importantly, we threaten, or that could threaten, the social protection of the Palestinian population. And this is actually, in response to your question, this is what the ILO brings in Palestine. Our interventions focus on strengthening the national social protection system in the medium to the long term. We know the immense needs and the physical situation of the Palestinian Authority at the moment, but also in the short term, what we're trying to do, as mentioned by my colleague Keres, is to enhance coordination and alignment between national programs and humanitarian safety nets. And this is also where the thematic working group comes, is that we brought humanitarian and development actors, including government, closer together by discussing red lines, tackling small issues that would lead to enhanced coordination and alignment, and potentially, and I think most importantly, identifying a joint vision, which I will as well, for the sector, which I will as well talk more about it. So the goal of this, where the national system is strengthened, sustainable, and clear in its priorities and plan for the future, as my colleague Manal from the Ministry of Social Development mentioned about the post-war plans. Even with the current crisis in the Gaza Strip, we have tried to maintain always linkages to the national system. We continue to have discussions with government and humanitarian actors on how to retain linkages to the national system. One of the things that I wanted to say, but already mentioned by my colleague Claire from UNICEF, is the usage of the National Social Registry from the Ministry of Social Development. So humanitarian actors were as well coordinating with the ministry to use the National Social Registry for identification and selection of beneficiaries. And also not the Ministry of Social Development, by the way. We have as well, in the post or during the crisis, we have as well coordinated with the Ministry of Labor to serve those Gazan workers who were displaced in the West Bank, and they were previously employed in Israel. So the thematic working group played an important, vital role as well to keep linkages to the national system, to keep coordination in place, and to as Lucas and Gally said, to make sure that all of us are in the same room, talking about the same thing with the same phrases and with the same concepts. And this is vital. Recently, and I mean also talking about the primary responsibility of the state, with the ILO support, the Palestinian Ministry of Social Development and the Council of Ministers, the Palestinian one, of course, have recently adopted a new right-based social allowances for older persons and persons with severe disability in Palestine. That will be initially implemented in the West Bank, hopefully starting by next month, and later in the Gaza Strip. Now, these right-based reforms constitute a very important reform to the national system. The funding for, let's say, the next year and a half is there, but of course, a lot of complementary funding will be needed in the future. These rights-based reforms can also offer lessons learned for humanitarian programs, and as well to improve the experience for beneficiaries, something related to your question as well to Lucas and Gali, in terms of improving transparency of selection, accountability, and as well universality of benefits. So in light of this reform, we have been under the thematic working group as well. So the reform is moving from poverty targeting to categorical targeting, and we were still supporting both the humanitarian and development actors towards finding a joint vision to align their cash programming, harmonized approach used, extent possible, avoid or to the most extent possible deduplication. One of the most important files we're also talking about now that links to the national social protection system is to support the national authorities in the creation of a national vision on social protection, a vision around which humanitarians as well can align. From thematic working group discussions with the humanitarians, it was very clear that this is a prerequisite for humanitarians. This is a prerequisite for humanitarians to align and increase, coherence with national programs. They need a national vision as well to work with. So humanitarians will need practical and medium to long-term national vision that they can support and plan their programming in line with this national vision. But maybe just one last point on the importance of, investing in the national social protection system and in the funding. Of course, we can talk about visions and plans nonstop, but especially in the case of Palestine, where there are very limited financial resources accompanied by the recurrent crisis, occupation restrictions, it becomes even more important that development partners support and invest in the sustainability of the national system, which has proved work. It was not like it was not working. It worked before, it continues to work. It faced so many problems. It faced so many political problems as well. But this is something that as well, it's on us to take on. And the national social protection system has been going into several steps of right-based reforms that are able to provide, hopefully in the future, more universal, transparent, predictable, and adequate benefits, which I think both humanitarian development and development actors should always try, to invest in, align with, and support. Back to you, James. This is it from my side.
Thanks, Mu'min. It sounds like there is a strong political will and an articulated vision on the part of the Palestinian Authority to move towards a rights-based social protection system. And this is something that actually exposes some common values which are shared between Palestinian Authority's vision and some of the concepts that humanitarians also adhere to in terms of predictability, transparency, and regularity. So that seems to be sort of a fortuitous development and does not, even despite the current circumstances, preclude strong leadership by the state. So thanks for that intervention. I'd like to now sort of move us to our Q&A segment. I think we already have some questions that have appeared online, but maybe I can privilege folks who are in the room if there's anyone who wants to raise their hand and pose a question to one of our panelists who have spoken. Yeah, we have somebody. Please, if you would, introduce yourself and tell us to which panelist you want to direct your question.
Hi, my name is Johnny. I work at International Health Partners. We're an agency, we're a humanitarian development sort of combo. And we work a little bit in Gaza with some of our NGO partners. It was really interesting to hear the panelists talk about the thematic working group. And I was interested in how do you ensure the durability of the thematic working group in the future, if there have been coordination mechanisms in the past, what has happened that led to that no longer carrying on, that instigated the new working group as it has been existing, and how would you ensure that wouldn't happen again, because clearly this working group has been very effective to ensure that the holistic solution in the future goes forward. So how would you, and that's the way panelists, how would you ensure that it's durable?
Yeah, so I'm not sure if the audio was really clear online, but the question is essentially what's different? What's different about this time if there have been efforts to coordinate in the past? This thematic working group differs somewhat from previous attempts in Palestine. I think I'm going to turn to someone with some long-term institutional knowledge about this and give this question to Luca.
Sure, thanks. So I'll try to answer, and then maybe my colleagues can complement. I think there was not necessarily anything similar before that comprehensive. There was, and there still is, a social protection sector working group under which this thematic working group sits. But that's a very high level. The minister himself chairs it. It's and it's very high. What I think it's an added value of this group and one of the strengths that hopefully will guarantee sustainability. And it has already guaranteed sustainability, because I was talking to Stasha just before the panel today. I was actually myself surprised to learn in January that the group survived the current crisis. I was so focused on actual operations in Gaza that I've put this on a side for a few months, and I kind of expected that to actually have stopped, but it hadn't. It actually kept working. And one of the strengths of the group, and I believe contributed to this, is that it's really across multiple levels. So from the technical, we have bilateral, trilateral meetings between information management officer in small offices, looking at least all the way up to HQ and political levels of different agencies, and they're going through management, coordination, etc. So the fact that it got that much buy-in from so many levels ensures that I hope it will ensure that it will continue, it will be effective, and also regardless of people changing and rotation of staff, maybe even new agencies coming in or agencies moving out. I believe that the fact that it's so cross-level will guarantee sustainability to this, because it really had both political, management, coordination, and technical buy-in at many levels. Maybe my colleagues.
Yeah, just to add, maybe the point really is, I mean, I think Karis mentioned that earlier as well, that and Lucas right now, this combination of the political and the technical, because I mean, these types of discussions have built a lot of trust over time, and that then coordination is really important. If you want to avoid that agency politics take over in these contexts, especially if lots of money is then on the table at some point. I mean, we have built a level of trust in the group on which we can rely. Nobody would throw that out of the window, because we know we can rely on each other. We had very frank and open discussions about red lines that institutionally we have. And I think that's really the strength of the group. And I think that's why it survived, because we really can coordinate beyond thinking about our limited agency interests. And I think that's very critical for us.
Okay, thank you. I think we also have some questions online. One is coming from Rolf, who's joined us online. He says it would be interesting to know more about how different actors in the working group approached the topic of data sharing and data sharing agreements. Yeah, on this question of data sharing, maybe I would direct this to Unruwa. I know that there had been some reticence, and may still exist some reticence for certain reasons. Perhaps you can talk to us about this question of data sharing and the agreements.
Yeah, so I mean, data sharing has certainly been an issue for us, including for political reasons. I mean, our own constituency is very concerned about sharing beneficiary data, and that has created limitations for us in doing that. I think we have now found a way in the discussions, is also with the ministry. Just last week we made further progress on that, where we are able to share data, and we are coming to a data sharing agreement, simply because the benefit of sharing those data for both sides is now very obvious. I mean, and I think it very much how do you say that? Overcomes the limitations that we have. We simply know, I mean, we are as UNRWA obviously very cash strapped at the moment. The ministry is and has always been, and by sharing those data, we are finally able to provide proper assistance to a range of beneficiaries that otherwise we wouldn't be able to do. And I think that clearly has come out now, that both sides see this is really the only way we can go. And the rest is then technical, which we are sorting out now, which is a compatibility between the ministry's social registry and our own management information system, and that's being worked out at the moment. And I think that's how we have approached it.
Thanks for that. I also
think, I mean, and I think it's a very important point, especially now in the Gaza context, that we have seen. I mean, what you said about the deduplication efforts and all of these issues. I mean, UNRWA maintains a huge database of the Palestine refugees. Getting that deduplicated in the system, especially now the discussions that we have with WFP, is really critical. And I think we are making some progress on that.
Can I add something? Just to say, I mean, data sharing agreement is incredibly time consuming. And if I can just share the experience, we have a global data sharing agreement between WFP, UNHCR, and UNICEF. It took us 2 years to get our legal colleagues to agree on it, just to say that how complex that issue is. And for us specifically in Gaza, having that agreement sorted out before October 7 with MOSD was, as I said, a game changer, because it allowed us to access the social registry and use it as needed with the technical assistance of MOSD. So for me, moving forward, really sorting out those data sharing between agencies with MOSD, agreeing on what is the mechanism for really automated identification is really going to be a huge operational consideration that we need to sort out in the different groups that are ongoing. Otherwise, when we get the World Bank, the IMF, those big donors coming, there will be that expectation that we come up with some kind of unified list leveraging the social registry. So on this, for me, it's really one of the key challenges that we will need to address in the coming weeks and months.
I want to come back just because I didn't see a hand that was up on the first question that came from the room about the sort of unique nature of this thematic working group. Mutman, you wanted to come in on that question.
Yeah, thank you, James. I will just briefly mention a point here on question number 1, and Kiris, my colleague, will as well add some points on question number 2 about data sharing agreements. So what was, let's say, different this time with the thematic working group and the coordination there? I think one of the most important points is basically we approached problems from a different angle. We focused on a very small practical issues that can actually make some progress. And when people in these organizations see that they actually made progress, makes them even more motivated to continue the work that we have done. I think the issue when you have so many humanitarian programs and as well as national programs, and you want to, let's say, enhance coordination in a broad way, you get so many problems ahead and you just lose focus. And then you lose motivation as well. So what we did, and something that Kiris, my colleague, presented in the presentation, is we focused on small issues. For example, using a list from the social registry, the national social registry, tackling some alignment questions between the big 3 actors, humanitarian, UNRWA, WFP, and the Ministry of Social Development, talking about, let's say, transfer value alignment. These small issues that we have as well made progress on, made it easier to continue the work that we have started. So I think this is really one of the changes. And the second one is actually we have convened several workshops that are not exclusively technical. So we convened these workshops with a neutral facilitator. We brought a neutral facilitator from outside the country that was able to bring actors together and openly talk about, what do I think as a part of this organization of this issue? Is it a major red line for me that I cannot, or my organization cannot approach at all? And if yes, why? And if not, then what can we do about it? So we approached issues not even at the technical level, but at the, let's say, political level and personal level, let's say. And that was very, very important to contribute to the trust thing mentioned by Sasha. That was, that contributed to really trust between actors. And when you have a trust between actors and between people representing this organization, it makes it very much easier to coordinate in the future and even to talk about data sharing, So yeah, this is it from my side. Thanks.
Thanks, Mutman. I just want to make sure nobody else has their hand up online so I don't repeat that. And then we have time for one more question. So a question coming from an anonymous attendee. How do you navigate the need for cash assistance and donors' hesitancy due to an increased focus on counterterrorism? So the question about I suppose the audits and all of the additional due diligence that's required of cash assistance providers in this type of context.
I assume I am going to answer this question.
You're our guy.
But maybe I can then complement. So this has been one of the, honestly, the key challenges we had since October. And I'm not joking saying I spent, I think, a good 50% of my time in October, November, and December convincing people we were not giving money to Hamas. To be very, that was my main job in October, November, and December. How we do that? I think, I mean, there are, first, we had, as for everything else we did in this response and before, we really jointly discussed on mitigation measures, on what we can do, on what are the procedures that are in place internally, but and that goes with the duplication, etc., national social registry, but also externally, for example, with PalPay, you know. I think there are a couple of important things. One, we relied on recognized authorities collaboration. Okay, and so the government of Palestine, if you want, that's the institution, that's the authority we are trying to work with. And so where the National Social Registry sits, the National Social Registry in itself is fully audited by the European Union and a few others, you know, on a regular basis. But also we looked at what and what others do in terms of mitigating risks of aid diversion and of aid diversion. And one key thing, for example, is that Palestine still has, you know, Palestinian Monetary Authority, who has clear regulations on these kind of elements. You know, PalPay, as many other and all other Palestinian institutions, needs to go through some clear steps of auditing and vetting, really, of names. You know, so we mapped what these elements were, both internally, what we could do, but also what existed externally, and then we did a lot of advocacy and work with the donor community. We fortunately had a lot of good allies, and especially from the technical level. So something we noticed is that when talking to donor institutions, governments, the technical level was very much in line with our understanding of the situation. It's when you scale up then to the political level in capitals, etc., then these questions come out more strongly. And so we try to meet donors. We had information sessions. We had an internal frequently asked question document that was used by all members to advocate bilaterally with their donors. And we had a number of other activities. But I have to say that was one of the key, honestly, the most time-consuming activities we went through, especially in the first period of the crisis, which was also interesting. And I might then close here, maybe hand over to my colleagues, because cash assistance has started on the 7th of October. You know, there were millions of dollars being distributed in Gaza from humanitarian agencies, development agencies, government states, the Palestinian government, also before, but then and there was definitely a level of auditing, a level of control, probably stronger than in other countries in some ways. But what happened after 7th October was a really tight and strict request for control, which I think really builds on the political nature of the crisis in itself. But maybe my colleagues can also then expand more on what they did internally.
Very, very quickly, just to say that I can only echo what Luca just said. Also flagging that there is a diversity in the donor group, right? Donors comes with different expectations, and we have to recognize this. Some are very, they all share a concern for sure, but some, when you start sharing those advocacy messages, for us, we have been really emphasizing on the humanitarian principles. For us as UNICEF, using those humanitarian principles, we don't vet beneficiaries in humanitarian crisis. This is a position that has been taken by the organization at the highest level. So really reminding all donors about this. Some are receptive to this, some are not. Let's recognize this. I think specifically for Gaza, the fact that we were using again the social registry, that the social registry was EU vetted before the crisis, made a huge difference in terms of building the trust of donors. But we also covered families who were outside of of that registry. And then, yes, indeed, you need to convince donors that you have the level of due diligence that is required to provide them with cash assistance, and also bring also the comparison with in-kind. It's not true that in-kind cannot be diverted. So again, bringing all those different elements together is really part of the advocacy that we have to do jointly as much as possible.
Okay, well, I think that about wraps us up in terms of time. But before we conclude, I want to hand over the floor to Luca Pellerano, who's the Social Security Specialist for the ILO in the Arab States based in Beirut. Luca, I know you have some reflections that you'd like to share after having listened to the panelists and the discussion. Please, I'll hand it over to you to close us out.
Thank you, James, and thank you to all colleagues really for what has been a very insightful and rich conversation today. So I'll just try to wrap up with some considerations as someone who's been, listening in and also observing, these developments in Palestine over the past few years. Certainly our collective commitment to the humanitarian development peace nexus means humanitarian development and peace actors working together more coherently to meet people's needs, mitigate risks and vulnerabilities, and eventually move towards sustainable peace. And there is no context where this is more important, perhaps, than in Palestine, where the protracted nature of the crisis, the recurrent structural emergency context, but also, as Momin highlighted, the critical role of social protection for state-building objectives are, of course, critical. We have heard how fragmentation and lack of coordination between humanitarian and national systems have prevailed over decades, but also of important breakthroughs, which seems to have led to some increased capacity to work together, including in the new tragic phase of the crisis of the war in Gaza. And I think it's been really useful to get some insights on what's behind this story, what made it possible to move beyond what remains often in other contexts lip service, to the Nexus agenda, and also what can serve as reference for other countries. It seems to me that the key message that has been made, I think, loud and clear today is that the Nexus dialogue and alignment needs to be structured, needs to be given flesh and bones, can't just remain a high-level statement of intention, if you want. And what we've heard is few elements of the flesh and bones that have been given to this process in Palestine. First, I think we've heard about relationship building as the core of Nexus coordination, the fact that actors need to develop that shared understanding of each other's work, the principles that define the boundaries of this work, and that over time, this will lead to increased trust and relationship within agencies, which is really a prerequisite for true collaboration. Certainly, we've heard about the importance of engaging both the Palestinian Authority and the de facto authorities, which has been really critical for work to move ahead, despite taking, of course, time and effort. A second message we've heard is dialogue in itself is a goal and should be prioritized. The real shift seems to have been to create common language, as humanitarian development actors often start by seeing the world really through somewhat different lenses, and also a shared understanding of the problem and a vision to address it together. A third message we've heard is that coordination can't remain abstract or conceptual or high level. So I think the importance of pushing for a pragmatic approach to Nexus coordination, focusing on some of the operational issues that we spoke about today, data sharing, deduplication, alignment of transfers values, really the approach of testing different elements of coordination over time through prototyping, adaptive management to understand where barriers and opportunities lie, must come first, perhaps the more strategic high-level policy approach. And perhaps a fourth message we've heard is the importance of a honest, neutral broker that was a catalyst to building trust between actors. In this case, the facilitation of the thematic working group by two actors which did not really directly implement cash programming, the ILO and the National Cash Working Group, which has enabled diverse actors to be brought together without a discussion in a way being biased to a specific agenda. The fifth point we've heard is the importance of developing a common vision and a framework for coordination across development actors and humanitarian actors really takes time. Most of you have highlighted on this being a long-term investment, and perhaps suggesting that development-minded actors should get involved early enough in the humanitarian response discussions. Sometimes the development approach to the humanitarian response comes too late in the game. Development actors offer the backing of international standards, which also somehow force the conversation towards these more long-term visions for actors to convene and work towards. So in closing, I think while standalone humanitarian social assistance programs provide, as we all see these days, vital protection for vulnerable populations, they do not automatically contribute to the developing of national capacities and may potentially undermine them. And this becomes an issue of concern the longer the crisis persists. By working together to achieve jointly defined common outcomes, partners are perhaps a little bit better equipped today to directly respond to the Palestinian people's urgent need for rights-based social assistance. And certainly the efforts may need to continue. On the one hand, the need to maintain and preserve national systems wherever possible, even when not possible to use national programs. Partners certainly have shown that it is possible to use national systems or components of those national systems. Critically, the social registry has been highlighted there. And also, I think the technical working group proven as a successful forum for this discussion, and hopefully it will continue to be prioritized as a platform for different actors to continue this work, as opposed to going back to more bilateral discussions and decisions, which tend to be a bit more like the norm or the habit that partners fall back to. The enhanced coordination and alignment among Nexus players clearly should remain a priority for effectively strengthening the national social assistance systems in Palestine, even more in these times of crisis. And I think the discussion today tells us that a serious and structured approach to Nexus coordination, besides lip service, is the only route to gradually strengthen the Palestinian Authority capacity as the ultimate provider of social protection, as it is eventually required to be if we want to look for sustainable, durable solutions. Certainly, I think the experience of the thematic working groups in Palestine offers, I believe, one of the most advanced experiences of developing a methodology, a model of work for Nexus coordination, focusing on both hard and soft issues, and hopefully will serve as an inspiration for other protracted crisis contexts in the region and globally. Back to you, James.
Thanks, Luca. I think that's an excellent wrap up. I just want to thank all of the panelists and all of the audience members that joined us both in the room and online. It was a really interesting discussion. And yeah, again, have a great day.
To you.
Thanks again. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.